Humans weren't meant to be here. That was the first thought that crossed my mind as I stepped onto the Academy's landing platform. The air smelled different, like sterilized metal and something faintly citrus. The artificial gravity was tuned just slightly wrong enough to make my stomach lurch before I adjusted. Eyes were on me. Hundreds of them. Some large and multifaceted, some glowing, others barely visible behind layers of protective membranes. They watched from a safe distance, whispering in voices too soft, too sharp, or completely alien to my ears. I took a slow breath. Right. First rule of surviving an alien high school: don't freak them out. I adjusted the strap on my bag and moved forward, careful to keep my posture neutral. No sudden movements. No aggressive stances. A shadow shifted beside me, and I turned to face my assigned guide, a student liaison, or as I quickly realized, my babysitter. She was tall and willowy, her translucent skin pulsing faintly with bioluminescent patterns. Nervous. You are, the human? Her voice was a strange mix of musical chimes and static hums, translated directly into my earpiece. That's me, I said, keeping my voice level. Her pupils contracted slightly. Too loud. Too direct. I resisted the urge to sigh. It was going to be a long year. The Academy was massive, designed to accommodate dozens of species. Sections with varying gravity, oxygen levels, and even humidity zones. Some areas were sealed off entirely, meant for beings that didn't breathe at all. As we walked, I kept my hands visible, another precaution. Apparently, some species saw hidden hands as a sign of aggression. At least the architecture was interesting. Buildings twisted in organic shapes, seemingly growing rather than built. Holographic signs flickered in languages I couldn't read, and a few floating drones zipped past, scanning students as they entered. The murmurs followed me everywhere. My guide walked faster. Many are concerned about your presence, she admitted after a moment. Humans are, she hesitated, searching for a polite word, unpredictable. I forced a grin. We prefer resourceful. She didn't laugh. The orientation hall was filled with students, their bodies adapted to every imaginable environment. Feathered beings with multiple arms, gelatinous forms shifting in place, towering insectoids clicking their mandibles. The moment I stepped inside, the noise dimmed. A ripple of unease spread through the crowd. I spotted a group shifting away, whispering. One of them, a scaled, reptilian-looking student, muttered something that made his companions recoil. My translator struggled, but I caught one word. Deathworlder. The label stung, even though it was true. Earth was a death world by galactic standards: high gravity, aggressive wildlife, constant natural disasters. To them, I was a walking hazard, an anomaly that didn't belong. I exhaled slowly. Don't freak them out. Don't prove them right. A chime echoed through the hall, signaling the start of orientation. I straightened my shoulders. Time to prove I wasn't a threat. The first class was a disaster. I'd barely taken my seat when the instructor, a floating mass of iridescent tendrils, began projecting information directly into the air. Symbols flickered, shifting too fast to process. My earpiece struggled to translate, lagging a full second behind. The other students absorbed the lesson effortlessly, some through touch, others through scent-based pheromones. I was the only one still taking notes manually. The student beside me, a soft-bodied amphibian, kept stealing wary glances. I ignored it until they finally worked up the courage to whisper, "Why do you scratch symbols onto dead plant matter?" "It helps me remember," I muttered. They shuddered and turned away. At least I wasn't the only one confused. Across the room, a feathered student made a sharp, clicking sound, frustration. Their crest flared as they turned to the instructor. "The Deathworlder is too slow. Must we wait?" I clenched my jaw. The instructor's tendrils shifted, considering. "Adaptation is the path to knowledge," they said finally. "Proceed." The lesson resumed. I stayed silent. Lunch was worse. The cafeteria was divided into biome-specific sections. My guide led me to a neutral zone, where a few students sat at a safe distance. I unwrapped my meal pack, only to realize too late that I'd drawn attention. A student 2 tables over recoiled violently. It consumes flesh, they hissed. I paused mid-bite. It's cooked, I said, as if that helped. It didn't. The nearest students subtly shifted their trays away. Omnivore. Another mark against me. Most sapient species in the galaxy were herbivores or specialized consumers. Predators were rare. Deathworlders? Rarer still. The realization was clear in their eyes. I finished my meal in silence. By the time afternoon classes started, I had a full list of unintentional offenses. Eye contact. Aggressive. Walking too close. Predatory behavior. Laughing. Startling. I was too loud, too fast, too much. The worst moment came during a simple exercise, lifting a training module designed to test strength. My turn came, and I barely exerted myself before the weights moved. Too easily. The room went silent. I set the module down carefully. The instructor logged the result without comment, but I could feel the tension shift. Deathworlders, someone muttered, just loud enough to hear. I left before they could say more. At the end of the day, my guide hesitated outside the dormitory. You should try to appear less threatening, she offered. Perhaps move slower. I exhaled sharply. I'll do my best. She gave a hesitant nod and left. Alone, I leaned against the doorframe, staring at the artificial sky overhead. Every instinct screamed that I was an outsider, that I didn't belong. But I wasn't going to quit. Not yet. The first real challenge came a week later. A standard emergency drill at least, that's what it was supposed to be. The Academy's systems simulated various crisis scenarios, testing students' ability to respond under pressure. For most, it was routine. For me, it felt like a setup. The alarm blared, and the hallways flooded with students scrambling to assigned safe zones. The drill simulated a hull breach, gravity fluctuations, air displacement, and a countdown to lockdown. Standard procedure was to shelter in designated areas until staff stabilized the situation. I didn't follow standard procedure. Something felt off. Maybe it was the way the lights flickered irregularly. Maybe it was the faint, high-pitched whine my ears caught beneath the alarms. Either way, I hesitated and then I ran. The others hesitated too, watching in stunned silence as I bolted in the opposite direction of the safe zones. I ignored them. My gut told me the lockdown system wasn't going to engage properly, and if the barriers failed, half the students in this wing were about to find themselves exposed to vacuum. I reached the manual override panel just as the first seal malfunctioned. The artificial atmosphere wavered, a shimmering distortion that sent panicked students stumbling back. My fingers flew across the interface, bypassing the delay, forcing the emergency locks to engage. The barriers slammed into place a full 10 seconds before the automated system caught up. When I turned, the others were still staring. The instructor arrived moments later, their tendrils twitching in agitation. Explain. I wiped my palms on my uniform, exhaling. The system lagged. I noticed the fluctuation. Acted before it failed. Silence. Then, finally, acceptable. The drill ended. The whispers didn't. Later, as I sat outside, trying to clear my head, a shadow loomed beside me. I glanced up to see a familiar scaled student, the same one who had muttered Deathworlder on my first day. He studied me, then lowered himself onto the bench with deliberate slowness. You should have let the system work, he said. I shrugged. Didn't trust it. His eyes narrowed. Instinct. Experience. A pause. Then, to my surprise, he let out a low, amused huff. Deathworlders. But this time, there was something different in his tone. Less disdain. More understanding. The next day, when I walked into the cafeteria, he didn't move away. Neither did a few others. It wasn't much. But it was a start. The real crisis didn't come as a drill. It started with a tremor, faint, almost imperceptible. Most students dismissed it as a routine gravity adjustment. I didn't. The vibration was wrong. Rhythmic. Mechanical. A malfunction. Then the lights flickered, and the emergency sirens blared. The Academy's AI stuttered through an alert, Structural failure detected. Sector 7. Evacuation recommended. Panic spread fast. Some students froze, others bolted in every direction. The academy's layout was meant to accommodate dozens of species, but in an emergency, that meant chaos. Some couldn't move quickly in lower gravity, others were disoriented by the alarm's frequency. The designated evacuation routes weren't designed for real urgency. I moved before thinking. The control station was on the upper level. Reaching it meant crossing a section where gravity had already destabilized. A few students were stuck, one clinging to a railing, their limbs too weak to counter the shifting forces. Another had collapsed entirely, their biology unable to handle the sudden pressure change. No one else was stopping. I adjusted my stance, pushing through the fluctuations, reaching the first student. "Hold on," I said, securing their arm and hauling them upright. Too fast. They flinched at my strength, but I didn't have time to be careful. "We need to move." More followed. A few others had steadied themselves enough to help. The scaled student from before appeared at my side, supporting a smaller companion. "What now, Deathworlder?" he asked, voice tight but steady. I pointed toward the auxiliary exit. "Get them through there. I'll stabilize the core system." He hesitated. Then, with a sharp nod, he turned to the others. "Move." Reaching the control station was the easy part. Bypassing the security lock took longer than I liked. The failure was spreading pressure buildup in the lower sectors, a cascading effect that would shut down life support if it wasn't stopped. The AI flickered. "Override unauthorized." I muttered a curse. No time for proper authorization. I did what humans did best. Improvised. Manual override. System bypass. Force reset. The alarms flared one last time before silencing. The pressure stabilized. The gravity equalized. The danger passed. By the time I returned, the students who had made it through the evacuation point were staring. Some with shock. Some with something else. Respect. The instructors arrived minutes later. Questions. Assessments. But the damage was done, perception shifted. The scaled student crossed his arms as I approached. Reckless. Effective, I countered. A pause. Then that same amused huff. Maybe Deathworlders do belong here after all. For the first time since I arrived, I believed it too.